What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. For years now, sanctions have been treated like some background noise, something abstract, something technical, something discussed in press releases and spreadsheets, but very far away from the real life and the impact that they should have. And because of that, most people missed the moment when something truly different finally happened. Not another symbolic restriction, not another polite warning, not another just half measure wrapped in diplomatic language. No, this time, the blow landed exactly where the entire Russian war machine draws its oxygen from. The blow was on money, on oil, specifically. Not ideology, not slogans, not speeches, just raw cash flow. And that's why the latest move matters so much more than everything that came before it. What began as yet another round of theatrical expectations around peace talks suddenly turned into a hard pivot. In a single day, the US did what years of cautious Western policy had avoided. Trump's administration went after the companies that make up roughly half of Russia's crude oil exports. Not shipping routes, not secondary tools, the core. From this moment on, any company anywhere on the planet is forced to make a very simple choice. You either keep doing business with Russian oil giants, or you get access, or you keep getting access to the American financial system. You don't get to choose both. And just like that, all the carefully constructed illusions collapsed. The illusion that sanctions were already maxed out. The illusion that oil revenue was untouchable. The illusion that the war could keep running indefinitely without any consequences. So today, let's break down one of the most recent sanctions packages step by step. What this means for Russia's budget, how it directly affects the war effort, why this move was delayed for so long, and what kind of political damage it inflicts inside the Kremlin itself. Before the sanctions even entered the picture, Russia's financial situation was already quietly unraveling. Officially, the 2025 federal budget projected nearly 11 trillion rubles in oil and gas revenues. That is more than a quarter of total state income. In other words, everything else depended on that pillar holding firm. Well, but it didn't. Lower oil prices and weaker dollar to ruble exchange rate forced the government to revise these expectations downward by more than 2 trillion rubles, just like that. And that's pretty much it, the foundation cracked. Even without new restrictions, oil and gas revenues came in about 20% below expectations. Total budget income fell by 5% as a result. The deficit ballooned from projected 1.1 trillion to 5.7 trillion rubles. And that was not because of some unexpected disaster. It was simply because the forecasts were detached from reality. And now, add the new sanctions on top of that. As of now, around 85% of Russian fossil fuel exports go to just two countries. Guess what? China and India. That concentration alone should make any finance ministry nervous. In a theoretical scenario, if both countries completely cut Russian oil imports, that would vaporize up to 4 trillion rubles from the Russian budget. That's not belt-tightening, that's structural collapse. Tax revenues from other sectors would fall as well, because energy drives everything else. A more realistic scenario, however, is still green for the Kremlin. India reduces import, China keeps pipeline deliveries but demands steeper discounts and abandons alternative routes. Some shipments continue through shadow fleets, and ruble weakens slightly, cushioning the tax collection in local currency. And even then, the budget loses still between 1.3 and 2.8 trillion rubles. Best case scenario. Worst case scenario, way much more. And that is the key point. There is no scenario where this ends well for the Russian budget. The deficit is already massive. Debt servicing eats up a growing share of expenditures. There is no reserve left that can quietly absorb another hit of this magnitude. Which naturally raises the next question. What does this mean for the war itself? To answer that, we need to understand how this conflict has been sustained in the first place. So let's talk about it in more depth in our next chapter. Strip away the propaganda, the mythology and the televised speeches, and one thing becomes painfully clear. This war has never been powered by belief. It has been powered by cash. Over the past 4 years, everything that did not work ideologically was simply compensated for financially. You already know what I'm talking about. The propaganda machine failed to create genuine mass enthusiasm. Recruitment campaigns turned to public embarrassments. Patriotic narratives did not mobilize society. Instead of conviction, the system resorted to incentives, such as once again one-time bonuses, debt forgiveness, injury payments, reconstruction contracts, and so on. The entire conflict morphed into something resembling a commercial enterprise. The defense industry, for example, is perfect example. For years, it produced impressive-looking hardware meant more for exhibitions rather than battlefields. They show all this in the Red Square Parade and the exhibitions inside Kremlin, so on, but not on the actual battlefield. Once reality intervened, the solution was not reform or accountability, it was just spending. Massive, unrestrained spending. Drones were purchased abroad, then domestically replicated. Factories were resurrected not through competence but through money injections. Corruption was never eliminated. It was kinda tolerated. Generals forgiven, officers stealing ignored. Entire warehouse vanished overnight sometimes. But none of that stopped the machine, because throwing enough money at the problem could temporarily belittle decades of theft and mismanagement. Even personnel losses follow the same logic. The human cost has exceeded previous conflicts many times over already. And yet, the ranks were replenished primarily through financial offers targeted at the poorest regions. People who never even imagined earning 30,000 rubles a month suddenly faced offers involving millions. And the calculation was brutally simple. As long as money kept flowing, the system could afford this inefficiency, stagnation, and even failure. And that is the most disturbing part for them. This setup does not require victories. It does not require progress. It only requires liquidity. You can inch forward slowly, announce symbolic gains, and keep going as long as the checks clear. Which is why oil revenue has always been the most sensitive and exposed component of this entire war structure. And that is exactly what these sanctions finally went after. But if this target was so obvious, why was not it hit earlier? Absolutely logical question that should have been appearing in our minds the first one. And that question takes us directly into the next chapter. Looking back, the most striking thing is not that oil transactions were eventually sanctioned, it's that they were not sanctioned immediately. For years, the West pursued increasingly elaborate restrictions on technology, machinery, components, and logistics, while continuing to pay for the one thing that funded everything else. I mean, just think about it. The logic is absolutely bizarre, but well, yet this is what happened. On one hand, restrictions tried to limit Russia's access to advanced equipment. On the other hand, billions of dollars kept pouring in through fossil fuel purchases. I mean, economically, that's absolute nonsense. You cannot meaningfully restrict someone's capabilities while simultaneously financing them. I mean, this does not that sanctions had absolutely no effect, that, well, they absolutely did. They increased costs, they complicated logistics, and most importantly, they slowed down the operations. Businesses had to route contracts through intermediaries, create shell structures, and absorb inefficiencies. Travel alone became more expensive. Transactions became more convoluted. Every workaround added friction, but friction is not suffocation. These costs were passed down along the chain, so businesses paid more, as a result consumers paid more, prices rose, competitiveness fell. And the state simply adjusted tax pressure to just compensate, simple as that. You have a problem, increase taxes. Meanwhile, the central source of the income remained intact. From a historical perspective, this contradiction will look absolutely absurd. Just imagine a future student reading about massive military aid packages, defensive preparations, public warnings, and escalating rhetoric, while at the same time learning that the same countries were transferring hundreds of billions of dollars to the very system they feared and opposed. That's why this shift matters. Not because sanctions suddenly became painful for everyday Russians. They always were. Trust me. But because for the first time they directly threatened the uninterrupted flow of funds that made the war structurally viable. And once that flow weakens, consequences are no longer abstract. Which brings us to the political damage unfolding right now, something we need to unpack carefully in our final chapter. The economic impact of reduced oil revenues is severe, yes, but the political damage may be even worse. For years, Putin's image rested on one core idea and principle: control. Control over resources, control over outcomes, control over escalation. This move punctures that image completely. Instead of appearing as an immovable negotiator, he now looks like someone who rejected an exit ramp for absolutely nothing. The offer on the table was not total defeat, it was not even humiliation, it was a freeze, a pause, a chance to normalize relations, lift sanctions, restore access to markets, and shift blame somewhere else. Many inside the Russian elite believed that this was the logical path. Trump was openly willing to deal, to rehabilitate, to reopen channels, to present the conflict as somebody else's legacy. That kind of opportunity does not just come often, if just once at best, twice. Refusing it without a clear alternative plan sends a devastating signal internally. And so now, instead of reintegration, Russia faces deeper isolation and shrinking revenues. Instead of leverage, it faces budget stress. Instead of confidence, uncertainty spreads within elite circles. And perhaps most importantly, the myth of strategic genius collapses. Trump's response is very telling. Rather than symbolic pressure, he went for direct financial constriction. Not gradual, not polite, but structural. And in doing so, he demonstrated something far more damaging than economic harm. He showed that Putin does not have a coherent endgame. This is not just about lost money, it's about lost narrative control. When the money dries up, every other problem becomes harder to hide. Corruption becomes visible, destroys the regime from the inside as a result. Failures become louder, loyalty becomes transactional, and transactional systems are fragile once resources shrink. For the first time in years, sanctions are no longer just an inconvenience layered into everyday life. They are a direct challenge to the financial engine that has kept this war running despite everything else going wrong. Whether China and India fully comply or partially adjust, the outcome is still the same. The margin for error disappears, the ability to compensate for failure weakens, and the illusion of infinite endurance fades. This shift obviously did not happen overnight. And yes, it should have happened much earlier, but now that it is here, its impact will ripple far beyond spreadsheets. Budgets limit choices, choices limit strategy, and strategy, when exposed as improvisation, reshapes political realities very quickly. If you want to keep following how these cracks form, widen, and eventually reshape the entire system, guys, please make sure to subscribe to our channel. We will keep breaking down what actually matters, why it matters, and what comes next. There is a lot more to unpack, and future episodes will go even deeper into how money, power, and decisions collide in real time. If you also want to support our work, the link's down below, for example Patreon, where you can find an additional chapter at the end of each episode. Thanks so much for watching, see you tomorrow.
We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.